Hey guys, so in this video we will UV unwrap this character here in ZBrush. This is the part 5 of the course. I have made this entire character from the beginning. If you haven't already, watch from part 1. I have also explained what appeal is for a 3D character. Watch that video also if you haven't. It is to understand the meaning of the course. So UV mapping is pretty straightforward in ZBrush. We will use a plugin called UV Master. This is a plugin shipped by default in ZBrush. To access it, you have to click the Z plugin. You would see it here at the bottom. Now what UV Master offers is a bunch of options you can use to UV unwrap the model. The most important are polygroups. We will use polygroups for the UVs. For the model, I have arranged and merged all the parts together, and the model is divided into 3 subtools. This is the same distribution I will be creating texture sets of. I have separated the head from the body, the apparel has its own subtool, and finally the small parts like heads and feet will be their own. We will create 3 texture sets for this character and use it to create textures in Substance Painter. Also need to mention, this workflow is only suitable if you want to quickly texture the model in any software which requires UVs, and the purpose of the model is to just render and showcase it. For animation and game ready model, it is best suited that you manually retopologize the model first, then approach to UVs. Now the plugin itself is very easy to use. If I click on the zip plugin and go to UV Master, I have docked it here. There is an option turn on by default, which is symmetry. Turn this off always because it looks at the symmetrical UVs models and UV unwrap it accordingly. Sometimes it works but mostly for me it did not work most of the time, so I always turn it off. You can also experiment it by turning it on. But what I usually do is if I press Shift F, I will start with the close. If I press Shift F, I could see that our character is already within the polygroups because we used multiple spheres and used the modeler brush, so it has sort of a different polygroups already. Most of the time this will not be the situation and you have to give it polygroup. So I will turn this polygroup option on, and I will not UV unwrap it on this file. There is an option called work on clone. It is a safe option to use and very reliable. I highly recommend you use this option because if you click it, work on clone, it will sort of create a different file of the selected subtool. If I look at it, this is our original file. It has 4 subtools, but when I clicked on work on clone, it has sort of created a different file with this subtool, and it did not have any subdivision levels. If your original file has subdivision levels, UV unwrap won't work unless you delete the subdivision levels or ZBrush it again. So work on clone work like that. It creates a duplicate without subdivision levels. So what I will do is I will UV unwrap from this file, and there is an option here, it is called copy UVs. I will copy and paste on the original file, and I always use this work on clone option. So now if I hit UV unwrap, if I click flatten, you could see it had UV mapped it pretty nicely. And this is the magic of polygroup. It is fast and efficient, and you could really quickly UV unwrap for the purpose of rendering the model. Again, this is not a workflow for game ready or model for animation. This is merely a quick workflow if you want to quickly export the model to in Blender for texturing or Substance Painter. So we will just hit copy UVs and go back to our original file and paste UVs, and our UVs are copied and pasted successfully. We will do with the other 2 subtool as well. Quickly jump around and go back to the lowest subdivision level, and I think I will delete this part of the lower subdivision level. I need this much details in the lowest subdivision level. So again I will hit R, which will reset the subtools. I will go back to, this is optional, you don't have to do that. I will go back to work on clone, and this time we have a lot of subtools with different polygroups. Sometimes you would need a polygroup within a polygroup. Okay, and these small spheres, let's see if I first let me see with the polygraph. I will unwrap it quickly. It will take some time depending on the geometry and the amount of subtools. And if I click flatten, you could see that again the UVs are done beautifully. Alright, you could see that you have to see a few things on the UVs. The mesh is not stretching too much, and this amount of stretching is acceptable because this is a part of this hair and it won't be visible into the render first. But if you're curious enough or you want to be a perfectionist, you can just mask it out and hit Ctrl W to give it a polygraph, and again hit unwrap with the polygraphs on, and the model will be UV unwrap reading that polygraph which we created as well. Click on flatten, and again the stretching has gone. You could just manually polygraph the model and quickly UV unwrap it. The creating polygraphs is really fast in ZBrush. This is why this workflow is very fast for UV unwrapping. Rather than you would just mark seams in Blender or any other software, you could just go ahead and quickly UV unwrap it. Alright, if you of course want to render it for the just personal work and not game ready models. Alright, now the last subtool remains, which is the head. This is a little bit tricky, not that much tricky, but I will just hit clone, and first let's see how it fares without giving us the manual polygraphs. Okay, and now just hit flatten, and it did a really good job again. But let's see the head. You could see that the ZBrush is smart enough to read the biggest subtool and the smallest subtool. The biggest subtool has the most UV space, and this is another gem of the UV master, and it does the job automatically very good. Now all I can do is I will just accelerate this part and select mask lasso, and just if I want to just mask out this part, because what if we want to have a flatten this face, which is usually we want for our faces whenever we are UV unwrapping. And let's again UV unwrap it, and let's see how it fares. Again we have the face. Okay, this is acceptable, and the eyes we will again give it a now hit UV unwrap it, and I just want the eyes to be clean as much because we would be just filling it with the base color. So if I hit flatten, cleanness of the UVs depends on the, now we have the two subtools with the same polygraphs or similar polygraph. I can't seem to judge what the tongue is, so I will just again mask it out to make it flat UVs. I will do with the nose again. Hit nose, and just there is a very cool way to polygraph the front faces, which is group front, and I have made a shortcut here, group front, and I forgot to use it. You could just go to polygraph and just click group front. Okay, what it does, it looks the front of the mesh and polygraph it. What you could see in your front will be polygraph. So see the magic, it is very fast, and it always works with flat surfaces. It saves you a trouble to just mask it out with the manual polygraph. And I will hit the UV last and UV unwrap one more time to see how it fares. Alright, it fares really well. We are good to go. Unflatten, copy UVs and go back to the head and paste UVs. So we have the UVs now of all these subtools, and now we will export this model into the Blender. And for that I just don't use the exporter by default in ZBrush. I use a plugin, a Blender plugin called GOB. I've added a link in the description. You can watch several tutorials on YouTube how to install it. This add-on is a lifesaver for me because it export the model so fast that I jump into both softwares occasionally when I'm doing hard surface modeling, and it also by default import the vertex color too. So I will add the link in the description. It's called GOB. What it does actually is that after installing it in a Blender and setting in ZBrush, there are options GOZ, All and Visible. GOZ will export the selected subtool, All will export all the subtools here, and Visible will export only the visible subtools. So at the moment we have these three visible subtools, and I will just hit Visible, and now see the magic in the Blender. After installing, you would see this three icon here, and it is because we have installed a GOB plugin in Blender. So we will just hit import and see that it instantly exported the model really fast. If you go to the shading material, you could see that it imported the vector color too, but at the moment we don't need it, so we will just close all the materials and we'll create a new one so we could export in Substance Painter for texture painting. Now that after exporting the low poly version, you would also need high poly in order to, for example, bake the details like the feet or the head. Well, we won't be needing the cloth or the head as a high poly because they are pretty basics, and if I jump into lower subdivision, they are pretty basic, nothing to bake here. But for the feet we need to bake these details. Okay, so in the Blender I will rename this material differently. For example, clothes, I will just quickly rename. Also, I will select all and shade smooth. The reason I have renamed this subtools is that the names here and in the Blender do not have to be same, otherwise it will just replace the mesh. So I will just quickly add a collection called low poly and hide it. Now we need to export this high poly. Okay, I will just hit Ctrl W again, and let's see, polish by features, and I will hit delete lower. At the moment it's 1 million and it's very high, so I will just decimate real quick. I will just use the decimation master and pre-process the current and click decimate current. It decimates the model into 200k polish, and this is acceptable for the baking. So we will just export it again, but this time not the visible. We will just click GOZ and it will export and import the model in Blender. Okay, we will just quickly shade smooth this part of the model, and we will use it to bake in Substance Painter. I will quickly rename it feet high. We don't need high poly, so we will hide it at the moment. We will just export it when we are ready to export. Now we all need to change the materials of this low poly set. This is important, listen very carefully. If I select each of these two, I have closed the materials, and what material does is, materials in Blender are texture sets in Substance Painter. Remember that materials are in Blender. Materials in Blender are texture sets in Substance Painter. I will tell you what I mean in the next video where I'll be texturing it. At the moment, it is important that you give each of them a proper material. Don't change anything, just name it, like the head for this, because Substance Painter won't read this area of names, it will read this, and you will select the meshes by these categories. So for the feet and the hairs, I will just rename it feet and hairs. For the clothes, do this again. Clothes. Alright, now we are ready to export. It is important that you check the face orientation too, and by going on to this icon and clicking on face orientation, you would see that all is blue. Sometimes it is red. Either fix the mesh or just flip normals. We don't need to change anything here, so I will just turn off. Now we are ready to export this map for texture painting. Select all these meshes and go to file, export as FBX. Make sure selected object is selected, selected objects is checked, and just export, and it will export as the low poly. Now for the high poly, we don't need the high poly mesh for other meshes, just this part, the feet and the heads. So select it, and I have made a quick favorite of the export. I will just go to files. Okay, don't want to confuse you. File FBX and just type high poly or anything. Sometimes we do rename it like low poly and high poly, but at the moment we actually don't need it. Just export it. Make sure it is checked to selected objects. Now we are ready for texturing. Our textures are ready. Remember, we have textured it on UV master. It does a pretty good job, and we have given a material by its name in Blender. Now we will just import those meshes in Substance Painter and we will be ready to go. At this moment, the part of this video is done. I will be texturing this character onto the next video. So thank you for watching. Keep sharing. Do comment what you like, what you did not, and share it with your friends. Until next time, I will see you on the next video. Take care.